Welcome to Transformation with Martine. Conquer everything and compromise nothing. This show brings you real, raw, and vulnerable conversations. If you have never liked small talk and have been on a personal growth journey for a long time, stay tuned as Martine and her guests share empowering stories. Now is the time to own your past and look toward your future with hope. Believe in your dreams, and all that you want to achieve is possible. Transformation Coach Martine helps you accept and love you for you. It's time to listen to your heart and tap into your unlimited potential. You have the answers you need inside. Sometimes you just need the right guide to help allow transformation to happen. Transformation with Martine starts now.
Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. This is Transformation with Martine, and this is where we overcome everything and compromise nothing. For those of you that are new, my show is about hope and the resilience of the human spirit. The people that I invite on my show have stories of overcoming and beautiful stories of transformation, and we just have real, raw, vulnerable conversations. Every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, and today I have a special guest, Nanci Reed. Welcome, my friend.
Hello, it's so lovely to see you.
You too, absolutely. And as we were talking about before we got started here, I love those balloons. It's just like, it just puts me in a happy place.
Yeah, celebration, right?
Yeah. And, I have learned over the years, and you probably have too, we need celebration, We do, especially as women. We need celebration. We sometimes forget because we're busy, we're moms, we're entrepreneurs, or we have a job, whatever the case that, we are in life. It's sometimes we don't take time to celebrate, even the small things, So it's so important that as we go, especially in life, and as we share with, I'm older than you, obviously, but as we go further on, it's like just even sharing that with people younger than you and your own daughter to celebrate.
Yeah, exactly. And I actually talk about that in my book that we're going to talk about too. And it's one of the ideas. I've always been so attracted to the idea of an unbirthday, like an Alice in Wonderland, because it's that every day other than your actual birthday is your unbirthday. And so why not find a reason to celebrate yourself and celebrate others and let them know that they matter and that they're enough. And every day without having to have a special reason for it.
Right. Absolutely. It's true. And it's just like, being grateful. There are always going to be things that happen in life, everyday life, whatever is going on. And there is always something to be grateful for. No matter what we're going through, there is. And it doesn't always feel like that when you're in it. But if we can choose to find some sense of gratitude, there still can be a joy inside of us no matter what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can look at everything wholly without having to not deny any part of it, and still be able then to see through that lens of gentleness the ability to find the lesson in it or to find the blessing in it, right?
Absolutely.
And that it always can, you can look at the very same thing, but it depends on what lens you're looking through as you perceive it. And so you can see something that's challenging and painful, and you don't deny any part of that. And yet you can still see how it's a part of your transformation and your overcoming journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what brought you into this beautiful world? Transformation, not into the world itself,
My parents.
The world of transformation and just being on a journey and bringing you to writing a book. Like what was your catalyst, per se?
Well, I would say the catalyst began with a few things. So one would be that even as a young girl, I was always highly empathic. Of course, I didn't know that word at that time.
Right.
And, so I would be different places, like with my mom, and I'd be like, well, why is that girl so sad? And my mom would look over at me and she'd be like, but they're in an ice cream shop. She's not sad, And then I would look at her and I would say, no, she's sad. And it was like, I just had this sense of, I could feel the energy of, a space or of an individual or anything like that without having to know them, without anything else, before I even went into it practically. And so I was always looking for like kind of my exit strategies out of places if it was like highly charged emotionally.
Right.
And so it took me a really long time actually to realize that this was not a curse, that it was actually a blessing, but that it did need to be nurtured and it did need to be grounded. And through finding different mentors along the way and different people that I've studied with and worked with, they helped me to really fine tune that ability to be able to still be present, but not be taking on something that doesn't belong to me.
Yes.
And not having that sense of obligation either. So going into that space of curiosity instead, and that kindness that I talk about.
Yeah.
And so, that was kind of the original foundation. Then I was in this really serious car accident where I nearly died, went off a cliff. I was the passenger. And as I went over the edge of the cliff, and people always talk about with near-death experiences that, they see their whole life flash before them. But for me, what I saw were like moments only of my life to that point, which involved any sort of resentment or unforgiveness or unkindness, whether it was intentional or unintentional on my part. And so I thought, as I was going over, all this was happening so quickly. But I thought about that there's something here for me to know. Even if this is the last thing that I see, there's purpose in this. Like there's this matters. I need to pay attention to this. So I was watching all of these instances of resentment, unhealed, things from my past and even present and things too. And then when I realized that I wasn't dead and that I needed to get out of that car, I was literally buried in dirt because the window was down and we went over the edge and it was just awful. But as I was climbing up, I took with me back to the surface, I took with me this thought of that, well, isn't that interesting that out of all the things I could have been shown, out of all of the memories that I could have accessed, that there was this part of me that allowed myself to see this. So how could this be significant in my life? And what was this trying to teach me? What was this trying to tell me? And so I began to journal. And as part of the recovery from the injuries that I had from the accident, the pain was so great, and the PTSD and the nightmares and, all these things. But what I found was anytime I was writing, that the pain lessened. And so that really helped me then to learn to be kinder to myself and to be kinder to my body, to be kinder to my experience of healing and the process I was going through. And then to really tap into this, I wouldn't say it was necessarily, channeled writing, but it was more that it was like me tuning into a memory of something that maybe I had, dampened out or that I had somehow hidden from my memory because it was either too painful or it was just too hard to quote unquote be normal then, in the world by having these awarenesses. And so I began to write. And that was really the catalyst for me, giving into that idea of looking at the power of unhealed resentments and relationships and things, and then the power in forgiveness and in kindness. And then also in how writing was allowing me to access that experience and that process of self-healing so that I was a part of it rather than apart from it.
Wow. That's really powerful. I can't imagine that. I can like visualize actually like going over a cliff, and it seems like it would be almost like an instant boom, but to actually have that time for those thoughts to come to you. How old were you at that time?
So I was 24.
24. Wow.
24.
Wow.
And it was on a bad date.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Talk about an ending to a bad date. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And it was, one of those things where, again, that same inner voice that told me all along when I was younger about people's pain or about their feelings, it told me not to get in that car. And yet, because at that point in my life, I had tried so hard to quote unquote be normal, to, be popular, to be liked, to be all the things that the world says matter, that I had really dampened and tuned down the volume on that inner voice. So that when she was speaking to me, I was like, oh, well, are you kidding me? This guy is so cute. What are you saying? Of course I'm going to say yes to go on this drive. And then as we were going over the cliff, that same inner voice right before, we actually went off the edge, it told me, push up. And so I took the right hand, my palm, and I pushed it up into the top of the car. And I wedged myself in because it was an old-fashioned sports car and the seatbelt wasn't self-adjusting. And the person that had ridden in it before me was much larger. So had I not have done that, I think the force would have thrown me either into the dashboard at the least, and possibly even through the windshield at the worst case scenario. But I did hear that voice. And this time I did listen.
You listened. Yeah.
And I pushed up. And then it was in that moment that I was pushing up that it was like time froze. And all of a sudden I saw all of these visions of this, unforgiveness or unhealed relationships or unintentional or intentional unkindness. And it was just like a movie, basically. And it was like, I just scanned right through it. And all that happened within, just seconds. And yet I can tell you everything that was like, I can tell you that the smells that were happening, around me, and the temperature and things I was touching. And, all of that is so visceral and is so clear. And yet it was only seconds.
That's amazing. I've read a lot of stories on near death, and they're all very different, but amazing. So when you actually first, when you were seeing these things, visions and all that, did something tell you to were you guided to oh, I gotta grab hold, or it just wasn't going to go anywhere anyway? It was just part of you, then it was going to stay.
I felt like that it was, for so long after the accident, I actually felt as though I didn't make it out. I felt like that my body and everything, like me, my essence of me, was still at the bottom of that cliff. So there was that real sense of, walking around, but not feeling here at all. And I literally would go and put my hand over candles for a while after I remember, just to try to feel something. Cause I think I was so frightened and also so just in awe by what I was seeing and what I experienced, that there was part of me that just went numb, because it was a protection for being able to not feel the pain. I went into that fight or flight mentality
for sure.
And I didn't even realize that I was hurt until I was at the top. And the crazy thing is that this is even more about the story, is that as I was climbing up this steep ravine, basically, that we had gone off. And the way the road was, is that it was two directions of traffic, but it was only a single lane. Right. And so, nobody was out there. There was no cell phone reception. It was pitch dark by the time I made it up to the top. And then when I made it up to the top, all of a sudden I saw these headlights coming around the corner. And it was this huge white truck. And then it stopped and people got out, and I heard their footsteps, and I heard this burly, bellowing male voice say, "Are you okay? What's going on?" And I was like, "Oh, we were in an accident." And he's like, "Oh, you've got to reach up and I'll help you up to the road." And I was clinging to the side of this, ravine. And I was like, "I can't let go. I'm going to fall." And I'll never forget, he said, through all of this, "I've got you, baby girl. Sometimes in life, you need to let go in order to be saved."
He said all that? Oh my gosh. That almost sounds like an angel-like presence,
And he really was. He said that they were out hunting, and they were these contractors down from another state, and they saw my hair in their headlights, and they thought I was a deer. And then they realized that this deer had clothes on. And so
oh my gosh.
they pulled over to see what was going on, but he was like just the right person to show up because he was so strong. He was able to lift me basically, with one arm off the edge of this thing. And I just remember taking this deep breath and reaching up into nothingness. And there he was. And he met me and took me back up to the road.
Oh my gosh. We do need to take a break, but did your friend get out okay?
Yes, he was fine.
Okay. Wow. It's a miracle. The whole thing is a miracle. Oh my gosh. Okay, so everybody, we're going to take a break and we will see you back in just a couple of minutes. Thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome back, everyone, to Transformation with Martine, where we conquer everything and compromise nothing. My guest today is Nanci Reed, and we've been talking about her near-death experience and all the visions and images that came to her that I never would have thought would come to somebody who is going over a cliff. I think myself, I would be full of terror, but never being in a situation like that, never knowing really what's going to happen, it's unbelievable to me, and so when you were going over the cliff, when you were coming, I think it was after, where you found your thoughts, well, ooh, that's interesting. Like you got curious about everything. Mm-hmm. I find that really amazing because just even as a coach, that's kind of the best way to not only help our clients, but people overall is like, okay, we don't really need to stress on that. Let's just get curious. Let's find an answer. Let's brainstorm how we can solve something. Let's get curious about it. That is the best way to solve a problem, in my opinion. So I thought that's really cool that, your brain just went right to that,
Yeah. I've always, I guess, ascribed to the thought system of curiosity. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's my love of Alice in Wonderland, which I talk about so much in the book too. But it really is that we can go into that space of curiosity, which means we're not in a space of judgment. Right. And so it allows for that gentleness to come in. It allows to actually see the whole picture rather than only allowing yourself to see certain aspects of it, or kind of like a cafeteria version, of yourself or your life. And so it doesn't mean that everything was perfect by any means. I had horrible nightmares. I definitely had PTSD for months where I would be in that car again and various outcomes would happen. Either the car would, crash, go into flames, all these things would happen to it. And then sometimes the driver would change, different faces of different people that had had significance in my life. The one that really got to me was when my own face was the driver.
Oh, wow.
And I recognized again that, that there was that voice that was telling me not to get in that car. Mm-hmm. And so, it was like, okay, how can I acknowledge that accountability without guilt? Mm-hmm. How can I look at my decision to tune that out again without beating myself up for it, without hating myself for it, without, blaming myself for it? And that was really challenging. And by no means was it easy. It might have been simple, quote unquote, but it was not easy, as we say in the coaching world so often, with our clients and everything. And so it really, though, did allow me, because I wasn't sleeping very much because I was having so many nightmares and I was in so much physical pain too, that it did allow me the space for writing. And so I took out my journal and I would just start writing, and it was like, that would just be something that would flow within me. And so the first thing I ever wrote was called "The Instant Is All There Is." And it was, it was all about that the past is gone. The only present is right now. And that there's nothing I can do to make God love me less or more. That all is as it is right now. And it was like, well, where are these thoughts coming from? I wasn't really raised religious. I wasn't, my mother had studied something called the Course in Miracles, but at that point I didn't really know it other than it was a blue book that was in our house. And He had people come over to our house and, you know, talk about it and everything. And I had no idea that it would become so actually part of my path as well. Because one of the things about A Course in Miracles is that it's not about trying to get more followers or believers, you know, in it. It's a self-study curriculum and a self-study spiritual thought system. So my mother had never really, you know, actually put it on me or my brother when we were growing up about anything. It was just something that she did. So what I found so interesting, though, was that through the process of journaling and through my recovery from the accident, that as I was journaling and journaling and journaling, I shared with her probably about 6 months or so into journaling what I was writing. And, you know, she said, well, this is really beautiful. And this, you know, this has a familiarity to it. And she's like, would it be okay if I shared it with someone that I study, you know, with and everything? And I was like, okay, sure, go ahead. You know, they're just my thoughts. And so she shared it with a friend who was good friends with someone who became my mentor, Ken Wapnick, who was the original teacher of A Course in Miracles, Foundation for Inner Peace. And so she shared with him my journal. And I remember him calling me on the phone, you know, probably a few weeks after that or something. And he said, oh, is this the famous Nanci? And I was like, who is this? And he's like, oh, you know, my name is Ken. And I was reading your journal and it's so lovely. And he said, you know, he's like, I know you haven't read anything of the Course in Miracles. And I said, no, I really haven't. And he said, so don't read anything out of it. He said, yet. He's like, if you trust me and if you, you know, are feeling aligned with this, he said, basically just keep writing and don't force it, let it flow. Don't even go back and analyze it. Just write whatever you feel, whenever you feel. And then he said, and then there'll be a day that I'll, you know, you can call me anytime with any questions. Here's my phone number and here's my fax, you know, back in the day and everything. And he said, you can send me any of your writings that you want. And he said, I'll be happy to talk to you about them. He said, but just don't open anything else. And I was like, okay. Then he said, well, I'll let you know in the future when there is a day that if you're curious and you want to open the book, you can. And so I was like, okay, sure. And for some reason, I just trusted him completely.
Yeah.
There was such a gentleness and a kindness and just a love about everything with him. And so I did my part. I kept writing. Probably another 6 months or so went by. And then he called again and he said, okay, today's the day. Cause I'd been sending him my writings as they came through and everything.
Yeah.
And he said, if you're curious, go ahead and open the blue book. And he's like, don't even think about it. Don't look at the pages. Just open it up to whatever you feel drawn to. And so I opened it up. And I opened it up to something called the Forgotten Song. And it's a section within A Course in Miracles. And there are many, many, many similar sort of, you know, sentiments and lines and everything, very similar in tone and phraseology, even to what I'd been writing. And yet I'd never read it. And so when I read it and I told him, I was like, well, that's really interesting, like how this is written and the flow of it and everything. And he said, well, yeah, because truth is truth. And he said, so your experience of it is going to be coming through you, of course, but what you're writing is tapping into something that we who follow this, you know, thought system believe is true. And so I was like, well, this is fascinating. And so then I started reading more about A Course in Miracles and I still did my journaling. And he invited me down to see him in a workshop and I got to know him and he became my mentor. And, you know, there was this incredible relationship that never would have happened if it wasn't for that car accident. And if it wasn't for me leaning into that intuitive, gentle nudge about maybe I should be writing some things down. Maybe that will help me to distract myself from this pain. And so originally writing came from a place of pain. And then with time, it's transformed that writing has come from a place of healing.
Yes. Wow. That's amazing. It really is amazing. So like, I know that you would not like subscribe to have this happen to you again, but at the same time, you know, the things that have happened to me in my life, getting cancer, just childhood stuff, all this, I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but I wouldn't trade my journey for anything. And I imagine you feel the same.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That, you know, like every seeming detour in life actually didn't take me away from my path. It is my path.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think of them as purposeful redirections instead of detours.
Yeah.
And when you reframe them like that, then it's like, oh, okay, so now I can get curious again about what is this for? What is this showing me? What is this allowing me to look at differently? What is this letting me to let go of? Right? What is this giving me the space and the choice? Because we always have a choice. And
Yes,
for
we do.
for so long, I tried to make my life be perfect. I tried to be the perfect girl, the perfect girlfriend, the perfect daughter, the perfect, all these things. But what I realized was that quest for perfection really came from fear that my own choices would not be enough or that they'd be wrong. And that somehow that meant that I was wrong, then like fundamentally, beyond time and space, like that there was something wrong with me if things weren't perfect, if I wasn't doing things perfectly. And so there's been real healing, perfectly imperfectly, because it's not about being fully cured, quote unquote.
Yes.
But it's about being able to step into that place of gentleness and of kindness and curiosity, like I talk about, where you're making space for there to be a different perception and a different experience than that preconceived judgment or comparison or shame or blame.
Right. Absolutely. And what a journey. What a journey. I would like to ask about the things again that you got when you're going down the cliff or the ravine, what you got, and talk about those. And if you really delved in a little bit further. But before we go on break again, please share the name of your book and where everybody can find you.
Okay. The book is called Happily Ever Now, Not After Everything Else is Perfect. It's a gentle guide for overcoming the paralysis of perfectionism by embracing our innate guidance. And they can find it at happilyeverNowbook.com, or they can also find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, many other different retailers.
Awesome. Okay. Oh, and how about social media too? Even though it's already out there still.
Yes. So you can find me on the Instaverse at Happily Ever Living or at Nanci Reed altogether. And you can also find me on Facebook at Happily Ever Living. And you can find me on Clubhouse too, which is that drop-in audio chat. I do a weekly Course in Miracles room with 2 other Course in Miracles room teachers. That's awesome. And so there, I think it's just Nanci Reed. You can find me there too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And we'll be right back, everyone, for more on Nanci's journey. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome back, everyone, to Transformation with Martine, where we conquer everything and compromise nothing. My guest today is Nanci Reed, and we've been having an awesome conversation about a near-death experience and her journey forward, and Course in Miracles, and a fabulous book. And as we left off the last time, I wanted to just delve in a little bit more about emotions and feelings that came up on your way down, and then journaling about it. And you talked about learning to be kinder to yourself and, body in every single way. And, I think that's such an important part to really focus in on too, because we as women, especially, we spend time in the self-abuse room. And whether that's perfectionism or whatever it is, because I'm not sure about you, but I grew up in a house where you should be perfect in every way, whether it's the weight, your hair. If you're not like this, no man's going to want you. I mean, that's what I grew up in. So perfectionism for you, did you grow up in that? And then is that like part of why you had to learn to be kinder, or?
I believe that the perfectionism that I grew up with was unintentional in the fact that my father was born in Eastern Europe and originally in Budapest, Hungary. And so when he grew up and where he grew up, it was very much about that the woman is there to support the man and to, you know, look pretty and be able to cook well and you know, and not really, I don't think he quite knew what to do with this little girl that was like, hey, Dad, I want to sell my own pumpkins that were growing in the backyard, and I want to have my own business. Because he was an entrepreneur and, you know, but he didn't know what to do with a little girl. He wanted the son to be like that, whereas my brother could have cared less about anything, you know, and I was like, you know, I was like, but Dad, I want to do everything that you want to do. I want to have my own business. I want to, you know, all these things. And I was a girl though. Right. And so I don't think he quite knew what to do with that. And so there was that sense of that if I got all the A's and there was one B plus, it was like, well, what happened? You know? And my brother in a lot of ways, quote unquote, was perfect. You know, I mean, he had all the A's, he was an athlete, a star, you know, everyone loved him and everything. And so there definitely was some shadow that wasn't his fault, you know, it wasn't intentional or anything, but I certainly felt that as being the younger sibling. And I felt like I had to work twice as hard and do twice as much to get half the recognition, basically. And so there definitely, you know, that sort of did play into, I believe, a lot of the stories that I told myself. And my grandmother also was the type who wouldn't even put anything like ketchup had to be in its own special china dish on the table. It couldn't be out in its container or anything like that. So there was that son of perfectionism, you know, but my grandpa would go off to work and she never called him when he was at the office or anything because she was the good wife. And he came home and she was in her beautiful dress and makeup and everything, you know, the whole thing. And so I definitely saw that. And I saw that that was something to aspire to. And so I did always feel like I was kind of measuring short to that. And so I think that definitely played a role in that perfectionism. And then also, I mean, just to take full accountability, that there was a part of me that liked the idea of giving away my power and my choices to others because I thought then I was off the hook for the outcome of the decision. And that's an aspect of perfectionism that doesn't get talked about a lot, you know, and I talk about that in my book too, which is that powerlessness and that learned powerlessness, right? That learned helplessness, like we learn in psychology and everything too. I mean, that there is an attraction to that because there's that sense of that, oh, well, if somebody else made this choice, if somebody else made the decision for me, then that means I'm not responsible for the outcome. And I've maintained my perfectionism, right? And I've maintained that track record that I've set for myself. And there's a real sense of safety, even though it's very limiting.
Yeah, that is definitely a subject should be talked about more, for sure. Yeah,
and that's one that I have really spent a lot of time in my own self-healing has been looking at that. And, you know, it doesn't mean, again, it's perfectly imperfect because it doesn't mean it goes away. There's certainly triggers in my life, i.e. if there's domineering men or, you know, people with more letters after their name or experts and all these things that show up and somehow tell me that what I'm doing is wrong, or that if I only did it this way, it would be right, or whatever it is, that I will listen. Because there's still that inner perfectionist within me that's like, oh no, I must be missing something. And if I'm missing something, then that means I'm not enough. That means that I need to still prove myself more. That means that maybe this person has all the answers. And then I don't have to think. And I don't have to make any sort of choices. And then I'm off the hook. But what we forget is that us not making a choice is a choice. And that does then you know, enmesh us and marry us into the outcome that we're not free from it. And so when I realized that, I could have a lot of compassion for her, you know, the inner perfectionist within me, and be like, oh, silly girl, like you thought this was going to protect you from something. And really, it was doing the opposite. You know, it was keeping you playing small. It was having you give away your power And it was having you not have a voice, and having all these gifts that you were born with, you're denying them. And denial is not a spiritual state. So don't think that you're getting yourself to be more spiritual by denying anything in your very real life that you believe in. And that actually looking at all of it and seeing it all allows you to heal it all.
Yes. And all that denying yourself, or all the ease that you might have in the beginning is just going to cause resentment later.
Exactly.
Because you're not getting what you want.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you have your list of all the people that haven't measured up in your life, and you're not one of them, and you're able to have all the heads on the platter, quote unquote. And you get to say, here are the guilty parties, and it's not me. I'm this, sweet, nice person over here that never makes any choices, that never makes any decisions. That's always, giving away things to others and everything else. And it's like, okay, but what is that costing you? And also, what is that gaining you too, right? Like, what is the gain that you're getting out of this? Because there is something. And can you look at that without guilt? Can you look at that without shame, so that you can actually see it to dispel it?
Exactly. Oh yeah. That's a rocking good coaching session, right? Yes. Oh yeah. All those questions. And if we can be compassionate for ourselves, and just feel for that part of us that's just afraid, or, afraid of moving forward, or, afraid of what other people are thinking, and, she's too much, or whatever the case. Yeah, there's so much there. And of course, triggers always happen, things that sometimes you come back and it's like, well, wait a minute, I'm here again.
No, seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. That goes back to the Alice in Wonderland, where you're running as fast as you can to stay in place,
Yeah, exactly. That's just it. And I think I have to watch Alice in Wonderland again, because it's been a long time, and there's probably something I would get this time that I probably didn't before. Yeah. We say in my coaching community a lot, it's like, yeah, there's no one and done, and there's really no 10 and done. You're going to keep going back as many times as it's going to take to release those old stories and create new ones and all that.
Exactly.
All that
And there's no shame in that. We don't need to hide our journey. We don't need to only serve up highlighted versions of it or curated aspects of ourselves. We can actually stand there and say, all of me is me, and own it.
Yeah. Yep. Even those parts, and having compassion for the parts that you really don't even like.
Yes. And the more that you can do that with yourself, the more that you demonstrate to others what's possible for them. And so if they see you standing in your truth, if they see you feeling safe to shine and to share everything from your story without apology or defense, then they go, oh, wow, maybe it's possible for me to do that too.
Absolutely. Our stories are so important. So important. Did you possibly delve even further having a daughter?
Yes. Yeah, I did. And that's one of the main motivations for me writing my book. I actually dedicate the book to her.
Okay.
Because I wanted her to know that you can believe in impossible, quote unquote, things. Because she herself is an impossible thing in my life, which is that, again, going back to Alice in Wonderland, she says, sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. And the impossible things that have happened to me, whether it be the near-death experiences, or, I married, divorced, and remarried my husband, and and there was like almost a decade in between those 3 different aspects. And we have our beautiful baby girl that I was told I could never have because of some anatomy issues that I was born with. And yet she's here, and now she just graduated kindergarten. And so it's like, that question of, well, what's possible when you believe that nothing is impossible?
Yes.
And the answer, everything.
Absolutely. So one more time, please tell the audience, our audience, about the book and where they can find it.
Okay, the book is called Happily Ever Now, Not After Everything Else is Perfect. And it is a gentle guide for overcoming the paralysis of perfectionism by embracing our innate guidance. And they can find it at happilyeverNowBook.com. They can also look for it under my name, Nanci Reed, or the title of the book, Happily Ever Now, at Amazon or Barnes & Noble or other retailers. They can find me in the Instaverse at Happily Ever Living, and also Nanci Ann Reed, and on Facebook at Happily Ever Living, and on Clubhouse at Nanci Reed.
Awesome. We'll be right back with our final thoughts. Thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome back, everyone, to Transformation with Martine, where we overcome everything and compromise nothing. This is where we have real, raw, vulnerable conversations. And Nanci Reed and I have been having an awesome one all about near-death experience that she has had. And she's actually had a couple more. What else would you like to share on that, Nanci? That's a remarkable, amazing, and golly, wow.
Yeah, I know. It's not really the thing that you want to be known for. but there's two more. So, and they both involved my now daughter, right, being here. So with this impossible pregnancy that happened from reconnecting, remarrying my ex-husband, and then having us be remarried, was that when I was pregnant, I was born with, let's go back. So I was born with 2 uteruses and 2 cervixes and 1 kidney.
Wow.
And like I say, no partridge in a pear tree, as far as I know. So that's called uterus didelphys. And when you have uterus didelphys, it's a very rare condition. I didn't even know I had it until I was doing my Pilates instructor training, which is a whole other story. And that when I was doing my instructor training, I was convinced that I must have a kidney stone because I had all this pain from doing all this abdominal work. And it turned out it was just sore muscles. But when I went to the hospital to get scanned for what I thought was a kidney stone based on all my symptoms, they're like, well, you can't have a kidney stone on that side. And I was like, what? And they're like, because you don't have a kidney. You only have 1 kidney on your right side. And I was like, well, how is that even possible? And they said, people can go through their whole lives without knowing that they are missing a part, and that your 1 kidney is larger, and it has done very well. I've never had any symptoms because of it, but now because I know about that, I do see a kidney specialist and everything else. But because of that, a lot of times there's also this comorbid thing that happens with women's anatomy and reproductive systems. So uterus didelphys is one of those things where you have 2 uteruses. And so one is usually larger than the other. And so one is viable for pregnancy usually, and the other one is not. But you can actually be pregnant with 2 different babies and have them not be twins. So that didn't happen to me. Okay. So that impossible thing didn't happen. But the impossible thing did happen, that I did get pregnant after being told that I couldn't, and after having a couple different miscarriages before that too. And that was one of the main reasons that my husband and I had separated the first time, was that I was so devastated over not being able to be a quote mom in that way. And it was sort of like, well, what am I then? Like, who am I? So, I went off and I lived a whole life in Los Angeles instead. And I have my clients, my coaching clients, my Pilates clients become my family instead. And I was like their mother, even if they were older than me. And so I went through that. But so fast forward, to almost 7 years ago now, I found myself pregnant, and it was like, okay, well, this isn't going to work, because I'd had a dream 1 year prior to that, before I reconnected with my ex-husband, where I saw myself in the dream being pregnant. I saw myself, and it was a little girl. And I was in delivery. And I heard a voice in the dream say, would you give your life for hers? And I said, yes. And then in the dream, I felt myself die. And I saw the baby girl, and I felt myself die and float away. And there was a real sense of actual peace to it, like that I was accepting something. And so here I was thinking I was not going to be pregnant ever in my life. And yet now this is happening. I am pregnant. And so my immediate thought goes to, okay, well, this isn't going to end well, no matter what happens. Either the baby's not going to be born, or I'm going to die for sure, because my dream had told me that. And my dreams had come true several other ways before. Or that, it's just going to be a disaster, basically, because of all this weird anatomy that my doctors have always said that even if I got pregnant, that it would be very difficult to carry the baby to term, that she would, he or she would mostly be born with preterm labor, or that there'd be some additional complications, that me only having one kidney meant that there was a very strong likelihood of my baby being born either with one or none. And we all know if you're born with no kidneys, you're stillborn, right?
Yeah.
So all these things were racing in my head as I find out that I'm pregnant, taking 5 different pregnancy tests to confirm, and freaking out and telling my husband, that we're going to be parents possibly. And he's totally calm. he's like, oh, okay. Yeah, this is all going to be great. And he's like, I have a feeling it's going to be a girl. And I was like, uh-oh, now this is my dream. But I didn't tell him my dream. And so I was like, oh, you think it's going to be a girl? And I knew inside also that it was going to be a girl, but I didn't say anything. So then we go through the pregnancy and, we get tested, and sure enough, it is going to be a girl. So then I'm having all these feelings as I'm having this horrific pregnancy, terrible morning sickness. I got vertigo where I couldn't see straight, and, I was literally crawling on the walls and everything. And yet I kept on telling myself that if the baby was saying yes, that I wasn't going to say no. And so I kept on going. And then through that, I had one experience where apparently the uterus that she was being carried in, the larger of the two, it twisted without me knowing it. And so it's called uterine torsion. But on the ultrasound, it looks normal. So nobody understood, while all of a sudden my blood pressure was tanking, I was passing out, I was having all these things happen, and they couldn't explain. I couldn't even have my feet down on the floor underneath of me. I had to curl them up under one side when I sat, because otherwise my blood pressure would go down so fast, I would just pass out.
Oh my goodness.
So I was hospitalized and all these things, and they still couldn't figure it out. And I passed out one day at our house in the front yard, and my husband ran out. And that's how the book opens, actually, is me telling the story of what happens to the colors when you think you're going to die. Like the colors, everyone talks about the light you see, but they don't talk about the colors. And for me, all the colors disappeared. And it was just one single experience of light. And so, there was that experience. And then when I was actually having the baby, so we got through everything, and I was supposed to have a scheduled C-section, because thank goodness the OBGYN, even though the ultrasound showed normal, my experience of, being so sick and having all these issues, she was like, I just think we should schedule a C-section for you at 39 weeks. And so that saved my life, and it saved my baby's life, because when we were in the delivery and they cut me open on the table, the doctor says, "Where's the baby?" And I was like, what? What do you mean, where's the baby? Has this all been a dream? What's going on? And then another doctor, thank goodness, was there. And he was like, oh, it's twisted. So they had to remove part of the uterus, pull the uterus out, untwist it, get the baby out. So she swallowed all this amniotic fluid. They had to rush her off to the NICU because she wasn't oxygenating properly. And that was my first role as a mother, where I told my husband, I said, go with her. Don't stay here with me. So then I was hemorrhaging, and they weren't paying attention to me because they were worried about her. I didn't even get to hold her or anything. I just saw her. And so I was bleeding out. And as I was bleeding out, I heard that same voice that I heard in my dream before saying, would you die for her? And then I said, yes. And I felt really peaceful, because I was cold and it was just all going to be over, kind of like I had done my part maybe. And then I heard the voice of my mentor, Ken, and he said, but you don't have to. That true love doesn't mean sacrifice, that it's a choice made once beyond time and then experienced for eternity. And he said that I didn't have to give my life to have hers. And so I fully accepted that. And when I did, I heard this voice saying, "Oh, no, you don't. You're not going anywhere." And this needle jabbed into my shoulder as hard as it could from the anesthesiologist who had noticed I was hemorrhaging. Stopped the bleeding. They paid attention to me and I came back into my body basically. And I lived to tell the tale. And I really feel like ever since then, I made a very big decision that I don't need to have these near-death experiences anymore. And also that I can fully be here in this world and yet still feel connected to that part of me that has that memory, that was doing the writing, that has been doing the coaching, that's been doing, all these other things and having these awarenesses that doesn't have to be mutually exclusive, that I can be in the world, but not of it.
Yes, absolutely. What a tremendous experience. And I know we could go for a long more and share more, and we have to end the show, but it's been an absolute pleasure, Nanci. I loved having you here and sharing time with you, and maybe we'll do another one.
Yes.
Nice.
Okay. I would love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you everyone so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Transformation with Martine, real, raw, and vulnerable conversations. Listen or watch live every Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern on transformationtalkradio.com, as Martine and her guests have deep, meaningful conversations, sharing empowering stories. Step into your passions and lead with your heart. If you are ready to accept and love you for you, visit martineemmons.com and start allowing transformation to happen today.